Live. I have a very, very special guest for you all today. And yes, I'm streaming at 12:30 p.m. instead of 12:30 a.m. We're always developing, we're always growing. So this is Elder Comrade Jon Melrod. So it's an honor to have him here. He's author of this excellent book, Fighting Times, Organizing on the Front Lines of the Class War. You can pick it up on PM Press. I highly recommend you do because we have a lot of young militants, like people who are taking jobs just to organize. So it's important to learn from the experiences of our elders. I hope I'm not insulting you, Comrade Jon, by calling you an elder.
No, unfortunately, you're not.
No.
I wish I was younger, but got to face reality.
Yeah, that is true because we're Marxists, and
That's
Marxists,
right.
yeah, Marxists always look reality in the face. We don't lie to ourselves. But so just tell us a little bit about yourself, Comrade Jon. I mean, we could talk about the book, but I'll leave that to you because this is your thing. We're talking about you and we're talking about your experience, and we're benefiting from your experience to learn how to advance the movement in our time using the struggle that you helped wage in the 70s and the 80s.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. And, just very quickly, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in the 50s in D.C. And I got a lot of what I later learned was what I had observed as a young kid of living in an apartheid like city, which DC was. It was not very far from Jim Crow in the South. I mean, when we were kids at 10, we used to go to the amusement park in Glen Echo, Maryland. And in 1960, the students from Howard University set up a picket line demanding that the amusement park be integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And they all the white racists came out of the woodwork to
Yeah.
attack the black students, and in the end they poured bleach into the pool so that none of us, black or white, could swim. And as a young kid, only being 10 years old, that imprinted a lasting impression on me that that was so wrong, and that racism was so wrong, and that it made no sense that neither black or white kids could swim together when we both lived in the same 100-degree Washington D.C. heat. And that lasted with me through life. I mean, became involved in SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, back in 65, right after they had killed three civil rights workers, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodwin, who were down organizing black voter registration. The Klan took them out into a bog and killed them. So that was how I got started. And in those days, once you got started, you became a revolutionary because they were revolutionary times.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and my story goes from there, on to high school where we were fighting the Vietnam War, trying to shut down induction centers to prohibit draftees from being inducted, to, like I said, involvement in the civil rights movement. And then when I had to choose university to attend, Madison, Wisconsin was about the epicenter of the student movement in those days. And that's where I went. And the first week I got there, I was already disrupting an ROTC class because they were training second lieutenants to go to Vietnam. And from there on, it was constant political activity. And I was among the students. Well, I should go back and say it was constant political activity, but the fight that we waged against the Vietnam War, most people don't realize the degree to which we built a resistance to the war every day on the campus. I mean, we lived and breathed fighting the war, particularly when the Vietnam vets started coming back and telling the real story of what they were doing in Vietnam. I'll never forget the second march I was on, and it wasn't that big because it was I got there in 68, and it was a Marine who got up and spoke, and he was talking about, and his tears were streaming down his face, that he had come into a village and his job was with a flamethrower to light up the huts that the women and children and grandparents were living in.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, after that, you felt that going to school was rather trivial compared to what was going on to both young people in America who were doing that fighting and to the Vietnamese people that were dying and being maimed and crippled and in the thousands. So I devoted my life from that point on to the revolutionary struggle, which, as you know, I ended up with pancreatic cancer in 1980, in 2004, and they only gave me 6 months to a year to live. And they traced that cancer directly back to the toxic chemicals I've been exposed to. And we were talking before the show in a tannery, which was the worst, the lowest rung of the industrial ladder.
Yeah,
Because I had been fired.
in your book you mentioned that a lot of this labor, like a lot of the grunt labor, you were able to like sort of move upstairs. But like a lot of the grunt labor, and this has a lot of bearing on me because like I'm the grandson of a direct southern migrant. Like my grandma was born in Mississippi in
Right.
1936. So like I was on the like my great uncles and them, they came up here in the 40s to either fight in World War II or work in the war industry. But like the last of my family was at the tail end of the Great Migration. And you mentioned this as well. Like you're in the 70s working at a tannery, and you've got all of these dudes from Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama. And you actually mentioned that as a sort of roadblock to organizing a union in the tannery because like these guys were making more money than they could be making picking cotton and tobacco down
Yeah.
south. And they're like, man,
Yeah.
you ain't gonna fuck my money up. That's essentially what they were saying. But but there was a cost for that big money and nice clothes. I've seen the clothes y'all wore back then, stay pressed, linen suits, collars out to here. But there was a price
That's
for all that.
and platform shoes that have platforms this high.
Oof,
But
your poor ankles.
one of my favorite social activities was on Friday when these guys got paid. They had some big checks because they had worked 10, 12 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday. And then payday Friday, we'd all head for the tavern and everybody would get dressed like Superfly and be gambling away all the money they had made the week before. But it was a learning experience for me, which was very valuable. I mean, a lot of young people today don't have exposure to different cultures, to different economic stratum. And I learned a hell of a lot in the tannery. I mean, I learned one thing was how hard work could be and how much the boss could make you do. I'll never forget this young Black woman who had 3 kids, and we had already worked a 10-hour day, and they came and told her she had to put in 12 hours. There I am. No, that's not me.
Ooh.
That's what I'm wearing. But and she started crying and said, I got to be home to take care of my kids. And the boss said to her in these direct words, don't make your problem my problem.
Mm.
I run this factory. That means you got to work if you want to work here. So people ask me, why do I title the book Organizing on the Front Lines of the Class War? Because that's really what it is a class war. Like you spoke about, exposure that your family had to industrial toxins that caused illness and birth defects. And if this wasn't a class war, the employer would give a damn about what chemicals you were exposed to and wouldn't ask you to dip your hands in barrels of trichloroethylene that had a skull and crossbones on the side, and that the oncologist told me that chemical had caused my pancreatic cancer, and it almost killed me. Way back when my kids were 7 and 10.
Yeah, and like, and that's why we need unions, not just like you correctly criticized business unions at the beginning, like unions that are basically they're more concerned about how much money they can extract from the boss by basically being go-betweens, labor aristocrats. Like
That's right.
we need fighting unions, like unions that actually give a damn, unions that do their job. As the IWW preamble says, like the employing class and the employed class have nothing in common. And that should be the start from any unionism that we engage in. Like, if your goal is just to get a seat on the board of directors and be like, okay, we brought you guys this here, have a shit sandwich. There you go. Oh yeah, long live the workers. Like, that's what a lot of these guys are about. They're just about building up their own prestige and feathering their own nests. Meantime, the workers get fucked. So a lot of people my age and younger are seeing this, and we've got like Starbucks Workers United. We've got the stuff that's going on at Amazon. Like, we've got people that are like, you know what, later for this, we've been doing this stuff for the past 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Nothing has happened. Nothing has improved. So let's try a different way. That's why experiences and books like this are so important. Because, like my grandma used to say, somebody has always been where you're trying to go.
That's right. That's right. And it's important, you mentioned the young people. I've had study groups with 15 Amazon workers who are organizers reading Fighting Times and discussing the lessons. There's because I always stress to people, when you're doing that union organizing and when you're trying to build a rank and file caucus or you're trying to make the union more militant, in every one of those battles, there are usually two components. One is the fight against white supremacy, and the other is the fight against, male chauvinism and discrimination of women.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not focusing on those two battles, then you're really not doing a service to the working class. Because the working class, to change the conditions under which we live, is going to have to unite all people, and not just around better wages and better working conditions, but around issues of, the Black liberation struggle, around issues of, what's going on in Palestine right now.
Yeah.
That should be a union issue. You can't avoid what is determinative of how the world is unfolding. I mean, we're facing a climate crisis. And I know that the Starbucks workers have made that a very big issue as part of their union campaign, is talking about the existential crises that all humanity faces with the destruction of the planet. And it's capitalism that just destroys the planet. They try and make us think if you recycle your plastic bottle, you're going to solve the problem. You're not, because as long as capitalism is pouring pollutants into the air, is, powering cars by gasoline, we're going to continue to destroy the environment, and it's going to kill us and make our children's lives much, much worse.
Exactly. And I really like what you're saying. I'm pretty sure you know what intersectionality is, but like, that's exactly what it's exactly what you're calling for. And you have a Maoist history. I am a Maoist. So there's a lot of what you would call dogmatism. I remember reading Ed Mead, rest in peace.
This is an original red book
Holy shit.
going back to the 60s that I've
Holy
had
shit.
since then.
Holy shit. But so I don't know when you left the I think you left the RU before it became the RCP, right?
Well, yeah. No, I temporarily, for a short period of time, I was in the RCP, but we really had fundamental disagreements in the RCP.
Yeah.
So, I didn't stay very long, and it also taught me, and something I try and tell young people is, we've really got to avoid this sectarianism that existed in my generation, because we have to learn how to build these political movements in unity and in common, and learn from each other, not downgrade each other's work, but learn from it. Some of it's going to be good, some of it's not going to be so good, but we're all learning together how we can build a revolutionary movement to change this society, and for once and all get rid of capitalism, and put in a socialist system that provides justice and equality for all people, regardless of race or sex.
Yeah, but going back to the intersectionality discussion, like, Maoists have a reputation in the modern day movement for being like extremely dogmatic. Well, hell, I'm pretty sure that Maoists had a reputation in the 70s and 80s for being extremely dogmatic. But like, a lot of Maoists, like, they criticize intersectionality because it's like they see it as something that came out of the bourgeois academy, where it's like no, many of the women that developed the theses that would end up becoming what we know as intersectional theory. Like many of these people had come through the Black Panther Party, they had come through the RU, like the RCP literally had up until the early 90s, if I recall correctly, a line that said that homosexuality is bourgeois decadence. And keep in mind, this is when queer people and other people who suffered from HIV and AIDS, like this was a literal pandemic that was murdering thousands of people every month, and the RCP had nothing to do with ACT UP or any of these other movements that were going on. So it's important, like you said, that we combat dogmatism and we embrace intersectional analysis. Like many people, you're a veteran organizer and you actually have produced material gains for people. Like you've been at the highest levels of union organizing. So here you are, basically directly contradicting class these class reductionists who are like, and it's not just class reductionism, it's also what Lenin and Mao would call economism. Like, oh,
Yeah.
let's just focus on getting wage increases. Like, no, like black workers are treated radically different than white workers. Women workers, queer workers,
That's
non-binary
right.
workers are treated and exploited differently than men workers are. So if we lie to ourselves, then we're really not doing the movement a service. We're doing it a disservice because we're obfuscating, we're hiding the myriad ways in which we are exploited. So I'm really, really glad that you said that. You all heard it here. Comrade Melrod says be intersectional.
Well, let me just add to that. I'm glad you touched on that because when I very first started working with the Starbucks workers, when they were just beginning to organize, they started talking about intersectionality as the basis of the union. And at the time, I didn't know what the word meant. And once they explained it to me, I said, "Oh yeah, we've been doing that actually for a long time." In our union, which was mostly white, we struggled to win the first day off in memory of Martin Luther King before any UAW local, before the federal government, when it was a real struggle. But when we built that struggle in the factory, we tied in the murder of a young black kid in Milwaukee by the police and made that part of why we were fighting for King's legacy. So we brought that right into the factory way back. I'm talking, in the 70s. In the early 80s, we put out a flyer asking people to go by bus with us down to Tupelo, Mississippi to march against the KKK. Now, I had never been south of the Mason-Dixon line. So I got to say, when I got down there, the bus pulled up. And as they let us out, I looked across the street and it was the Tupelo Police Department. And out came 20 hooded Klansmen who were all police
Yeah.
carrying axe handles and handguns.
Yeah, it took
And
a
I
while.
said,
It took a while for them to change out of the police uniforms, but I was tripping off that in this book. Like they made it so obvious. Like how the fuck are y'all just went back? Like you all keep your Klan robes in your police lockers or something in the station?
I got to use that line actually in the future because that's basically it. They had their Klan robes at work and they just changed. And I said to myself, man, if the Klan attacks us, you can't pick up the phone and call 911 because they are the Klan.
That's crazy. That's wild. But yeah, I've got this book. It's called "Bring the War Home." Like it talks about how if you're familiar, it was written by what's her name? Kathleen Bellew. But she talks about like the rise of the far right. Like you had the Greensboro massacre when the comrades of the Workers Viewpoint organization were massacred at Greensboro, North Carolina, with a by Klansmen and Nazis who had a literal police escort. Like it was like a caravan. Like the
Yep.
cops are here, and then you've got all these tobacco chewing Nazis and Klansmen coming in and they got out of the car, calmly loaded their rifles and pistols, and murdered these people. And like there was a reason for that. Like a lot of these guys were Vietnam vets, like those that you worked with in Milwaukee and Kenosha. But these were radicalized in the opposite direction. And it's a really good book. It's called Bring the War Home by Kathleen Bellew. But I highly recommend it if you want a history of the far right in this period. There's also another one. It's by Vegas Tenold. It's called Everything You Love Will Burn, and it talks about the alt right. But like anti-fascism is really important. Like you have these patriotic socialist types, these MAGA communists. They're just like, oh, we should. They have this really false narrative of what a worker is. I think the average worker in America is white and male. And when you study labor history, that's not the case. Like women were the people who, immigrant women were the ones who suffered and were burned to death in the Triangle Shirtwaist
Yeah.
fire. Women
Yeah.
like my grandmother had to leave school at the age of 12 to go pick cotton for some white dude that was also simultaneously molesting my great grandmother. Like, no. Like if you read Sakai, like he argues that the first proletariat in this country was literally imported. Like my ancestors, black people. Like
Yeah.
we were brought here to be slaves. Slaves and proletarians. Like if you look to the history of Rome, Rome did not have any proletariat other than slaves. Like if you were a free Roman, you might have had a trade, you might have had something like that. But the work that made the Roman Empire tick, the galley slaves, the people who were growing these crops, who were doing all of this stuff, that was done by slaves. So Rome was a slave society. That's where literally proletari, the name, comes from. It's Latin. And then America was also a slave society. America isn't really anything but Rome with Wi-Fi and shittier buildings. But
Well, we can bring that discussion right back with W.E. Du Bois,
mhm.
who was one of the leading black Marxists in all of history. Who I believe it was Du Bois who said the first general strike was conducted by slaves during the Civil War.
Yeah.
So I mean that's precisely what you're talking about. We hear a lot of people now talking about we need to general strike, but it's not something new in history. It's a form of resistance that's been used before, and it was used as early as the Civil War in this country.
Yep. It was actually like, yeah, W.B. Du Bois argues that, and that's one of the central points of probably his magnum opus, Black Reconstruction. And what, like, a lot of people don't realize is that, yeah, the guns of the Union Army made a difference, but the Confederacy, a slave state, you bring down a slave society by taking away its slave labor. So, like, if you read slave narratives, it's apparent. Like, as soon as the bluecoats, the Yankees, were in the area, like every plantation worker would just drop his tools and
Yeah, yeah,
they'd either take over the house and run mass off, or they go join the Yankees. And Lincoln, of course, dragged his feet. Like Frederick Douglass literally had to browbeat this man into being like, man, you're dumb. Like you have millions of potential soldiers, millions who have no reason to love the Confederacy, who have every reason to hate it. Why do you not put rifles in these people's hands? But as soon as that happened, the tide turned. Like the South was lost. You could outrun a
right,
a slavery state without slaves. So
right,
yeah, that's definitely an analysis that I agree with. And you compare that, like I see calls for general strikes on the internet, on Twitter all the time. Like, oh, okay, on this day we're going to have a general strike. Like I compare that to, and I always say that you comrades back in the day are lucky y'all didn't have the internet, because like, yeah, the internet is a really really good tool if it's used correctly. If it's used for sectarianism, if it's used for too much memeing, if it's used for nothing constructive, like why don't all of these calls for general strike ever pick off? Because the workers don't know about them.
that's right.
Like people,
And because it takes organizing.
yeah,
You've got to be willing to get in there and do the hard work of organizing if you're going to expect to get workers to follow you and to take bold action like that. And that's something that a lot of people are going to learn, and I hope they pick up a copy of Fighting Times, which by the way is for sale right now at PM Press. If you put in the discount code GIFT, GIFT, in capital letters, you get it for 50% off. But, and those people are willing to go. Right now, we're trying to recruit people to go to work in the Southeast because in the Southeast is where the major industry is now in this country. They talk about United States deindustrializing, which is true. But if you go down to South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, that's where Nissan, Volkswagen, Hyundai, they all are. And we need to organize those plants. And it's going to take people who are dedicated revolutionaries, because you got to go down there and you got to deal with real live racism from the white workers and be able to organize them.
Yeah.
I mean, but I want to go back to one thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about, racism or, white workers. Even in the union, we had huge problems with racism. In my department, which was working on the trim line in the auto assembly plant, I had become elected steward. And one day I came into work and all these groups of young people grabbed me and they said, "Hey, did you hear what the chief steward, Jim Gathing, said?" And I said, "No, I didn't hear it." They said, "Well, now you got to picture Jim Gathings, who was always had chewing tobacco out of the side of his mouth.
Yeah.
And he always carried around a styrofoam cup, spitting in it.
Ew.
He had he had the belt buckle that was like just holding up his belly. And, he was a redneck, and he had been elected chief steward, and he used it to work all the overtime he could, make all the money he could make, and do nothing for the people. Well, he had come in and said to this young white woman who I had helped get elected when we were changing the union to bring in more of us, people of color, young people, women. And
also, don't say the N-word, please. I don't want to get my stream banned.
No, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. But I was just going to say, what he said was, he went up to this young woman and he said, "Don't you be kissing on an N-word behind the bar anymore on Fridays." And she was just, here she was, a new steward. And she asked me, "What do I do?" And I said, "We have to deal with it. It's just as bad if the union is propagating racism as it is the company. In fact, it may be worse, because the union's supposed to be our representative."
Yeah.
So
and this guy's your fucking chief steward. That's blatantly, well, first of all, it's racist and misogynist and blatantly unprofessional.
Exactly. So we organized people to go to a departmental meeting. Well, I was also the department chairman, so I could make up the agenda. And we put this issue right on the agenda. And more young people and more Black workers came to that departmental union meeting than had ever attended a meeting before. And we just unloaded on that chief steward. We don't want to see racism in the company or in the union. And there was this one Black brother who had defended me from just about the day I started work. Real big guy who just got back from Vietnam when we met. And he got up and he just said to that chief steward, he said, "I can't change what's in your mind, but I sure can change what you say and how you act on the shop floor." So that's always going to be a fight. It's a fight today, even in a good union. Racism is just all pervasive and underlying so much of what goes on in society that it's contingent upon us, particularly white people, obviously, to raise that issue and to fight that fight.
Yeah. And a part of the book that really stood out to me was that you actually got your first union organizing experience with Jesus Salas, and like that he was organizing Workers United, Obreros Unidos, and
right.
I think that's definitely influenced a lot of your position regarding workers of color. Because if you had just got your start in one of these, like you said, business unions, the racist unions like that, I don't think you would have such an advanced position on your on intersectionality and people of color. But literally your first experience organizing workers was chauffeuring this Mexican brother around in a beat up car and hanging out in cantinas with people who spoke nothing but Spanish, with migrant workers. So I definitely think that helped a lot.
Well, that was very important to my development, because a lot of the students had not yet looked toward workers. They were more involved in student issues. But I'll say one other thing is, that I was very close to the Black Panther Party
Hmm.
when I was in Madison. In fact, I was in charge of being responsibility for selling the Black Panther paper on campus, which we used to sell about 350 papers, just to tell you how open-minded people were in those times, and that was to mostly white students. And that's when I first ended up on the FBI list, because when I got my FBI file, it traced a call from my apartment to the Black Panther Party office in Chicago and tied me to the party and said, be on the lookout for Melrod and his association with Black nationalists,
Wow.
and they were right, because later on, I actually was called on after they killed Chairman Fred Hampton in Chicago, and we were bringing up the Deputy Minister of Defense to speak. And this is after Fred had been assassinated. I was assigned to be his bodyguard. And, I had to load up a shotgun in the car to pick him up at the airport. And he had two other Panthers with him who got off the airplane, and they loaded up their pistols. In those days, you could carry a handgun and bullets if they weren't in the same piece of luggage. And, we marched into the student union, and we stood up there with arms because we were worried that the FBI could attempt to assassinate him. So,
Wow.
my lessons came early and when I was young. It's hard to believe that at the time I was only 18 or 19 years old. But, those were times that you became older than your age because of the war and the struggle demanded it.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, you became older than your age because like Fred Hampton was killed when he was only 21 years old, and I'm 29 now, and I look at, wow, like this guy lived a hell of a life. And because of that hell of a life, he was murdered by Gloves Davis and the rest of the pigs. Read, I don't know if have you read his lawyer's book, Bill Haas?
Yeah.
I actually did an organizational, like this was an organization I used to belong to, but I actually had him on we watched the murder of Fred Hampton together. This was a couple years ago, but we watched the murder of Fred Hampton together, and then we talked to Attorney Haas about like just getting firsthand stories about Chairman Fred. It was really neat, but like that's what I say. Like it's really important to talk to comrades of your generation because like all the people we talk about, the Panthers, Drum, Revolutionary Union movement, like you all helped live this stuff. Like you probably knew General Baker for God's sake.
I actually have a picture with General Baker.
Wow. And
Yeah.
it's like I'm not fanboying here, but like every American radical nowadays looks up to the comrades who went through the '60s, and I guarantee you, like in 30 or 40 years, people are going to be hunting down members of the millennial generation to be like, oh, what was it like in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered? Well, you had Ferguson. And it's like history repeats itself, but we have to ensure that the bad things don't keep repeating itself. That's why we have to really get it together and be really serious about this revolution thing because like we shouldn't be fighting the same fight that y'all had to fight back in the day. We should have been an advance past that stuff. So it's really important that we synthesize what's going on now with the stuff that happened back then because it bears like similar, it's not the exact same. Like we've become extremely deindustrialized as Huey P. Newton predicted in intercommunalism. Like the big factories that you guys worked in, the communal, I say this many times, but like the communal nature, everybody lived by the factory or like
Yeah.
it was a short drive. In the 20s, like the neighborhood was built around the factory. But now everybody's on the internet. Everybody's doing this all the time. And like back then, I'm really jealous of the sense of community that you all had. Like nowadays, I mean, yeah, we might have, I don't know, socialist soccer leagues or something like that, but everybody just spontaneously getting together, going to the bar or going to the restaurant across the street from the factory to get lunch and talk shit about the boss. Like that's part of why I think it was so easy. Well, I'm not saying it was easy, but it was different. Like it was relatively cool to get stuff spread throughout the factory because like all you had to do was print up some leaflets and hand them out at lunchtime.
It was great.
Yeah, but nowadays, like everybody's looking at their phone and I'm gonna go home and play. I'm gonna go home and play Fortnite, and uh, do all of this stuff. So there's a lot of distractions. I mean, not saying that going to the tavern in your threads is not a distraction, but even then it was building community.
Well, and it is a challenge because when I've talked a lot to the Amazon organizers, they point out that people, for instance, in Staten Island, come to work, and when you get out of work, it's not like you go to the tavern and
Mm-hmm.
hang out for the next couple hours. So you can't organize there. People jump in their car in the parking lot and head off on these 2-hour drives because they got to commute to work. I
Yeah.
mean, so it takes more creativity, to be honest, to organize today in a sense than it did in my day. Because in my day, we lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and about almost every worker in that factory lived in Kenosha or Racine. So when we threw a barbecue picnic with the band Love Expression, it was there would be 300 guys, not guys, but guys and women, from the factory who were part of our caucus, which was, leading the fight against the boss and parts of the union that didn't represent us.
Mm-hmm.
So it was built into the life that we could do that.
Yeah.
And I'm appreciative of that.
Yeah. And union organizing is also extremely dangerous. Like I read in your book, you had a guy who was literally a member of a Nazi party, the National Socialist White People's Party, and you were just sitting up at the bar drinking one night, and this guy came up to you and pulled a pistol on you and held it on you. And it's like, oh, you're the commie, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he had it in Jewish. Yeah. You're that Jewish commie, and that's an interesting lesson that you bring up because at first, I was I could feel the 38 inside of my stomach.
Wow.
And, I was like, whoa, what do you do? And I told the bartender, Midori, double shots, and we did them. And I said, Midori, another round. So the more that we got talking, I said to him, Deadeye, that was his name, Deadeye DiMarino. I said, Deadeye, when you in the trucking department, when your steward was fired, who was it that was out at the gates the next morning with a flyer calling on people to support that steward and not to let that discharge stand? Well, yeah, that was you guys in Fighting Times. And I said, well, who was it that organized people to take the first Wildcat strike when the International wouldn't back us? Yeah, that was you guys. And about 3 hours later, we were a bit drunk, but he starts hugging me and telling me you're my union brother forever. So you can get through a lot with people if you're there one-to-one, talking common sense, day-to-day shit to them
Yeah.
about life and about how we got to be together. So when Hillary Clinton comes out and starts talking about basket of deplorables, she's talking about a lot of the people that I worked with who I know can be organized.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you when we were back in American Motors, that was the factory I worked in, the union was so strong that those people wouldn't have been voting for Trump. It just wouldn't have happened, and that's a shame because without the unions playing that progressive role, people are confused in the working class. So they turn to MAGA shit and they believe that's going to do something for them.
Yeah. Because like when you listen to Trump talk, I'm not saying he makes sense, but like he appeals to a lot of people who decades ago you'd have been organizing. Like these are the kids or grandkids, or in many cases, like the exact same people that you were organizing because like back then, like the Democrats, okay, everybody knew the Democrats were supposed to be the party of the unions. But now, like the Democrats are basically extremely neoliberal. Like they're not like back in the day, you had Democratic committeemen who worked at factories. Nowadays, all these people are just like hacks with Harvard
Yeah.
and Yale and Stanford degrees. And a lot of people resent that. Like, who the fuck is this asshole from Harvard telling me that I have to vote for such and such? And in many cases, these Democrats have done things or supported things that directly harm working class communities. I mean, the Republicans have too. But if Trump is anything, he's a salesman. Like
That's right.
he knows what people want to hear. And so he goes to these factories. Like he literally, and like he hasn't showed up to any of the Republican debates, but he leads Biden around by his nose. And I'm really grateful that the UAW workers, they have enough class consciousness to know that Trump is full of shit. But like Trump was actually the first one to actually mention the fact that they were on strike, if I recall correctly. And Biden was like, "Oh, I can't let this guy get the one up on me." So he literally showed up the first president in American history to walk a picket line. And it wasn't because like he gives a shit about workers, regardless of that whole "I'm scrappy" guy from Scranton, Pennsylvania. No, he's a plagiarist, and like he's a hack. Like I think this role that he plays, this dumb, doddering, stuttering grandpa, I think that it's an act. Like I think Biden knows exactly what he's doing. He's not senile. He's not anything. He's just evil. Just like Trump is just evil. All of these people are just ontologically evil. And but going back to Trump, like he goes to Detroit and people think that like, oh, black people are just like solid, hard, stomp down Democrats. Like, no, not anymore. Like
No,
I work at a homeless shelter. Like there are homeless people that are Trump fans. A lot of black people are Trump fans. Well, for one, he has pretty heavy relationship. Like all the rappers love him. All the rappers love him. Like, and unfortunately, because of the like dearth of political leadership in the New African in the black community, a lot of people see entertainers as our ideological leaders.
yeah,
So a lot of people will listen to a Jay-Z over 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 some communist on the internet. So that's work that we have to do within my community to like actually rebuild an organization that has the political clout that the Black Panther Party did. Because like everybody tries to imitate, everybody tries to be like the Panthers, but we have to consider that they were the proper organization for their time.
that's right.
Like you walk around with a black beret and a leather jacket and a blue shirt on nowadays with a newspaper in one hand and a shotgun in the other, are people going to be like, "Hey, nice Halloween costume." So we have to like take into account the conditions in which we live. Like people are always trying to recreate the Bolsheviks or recreate the Chinese Communist Party. Like you cannot recreate, you cannot live action role play history. These organizations that we admire, that we study, succeeded because they were able to, as Bobby Seale would say, seize the time. And I think that's what a lot of these young comrades who are doing union organizing are doing. They're seizing the time. Like we've never seen anything like this before. Like people at and people's some of our more dogmatic comrades who misread political economy even are so silly as to say that the service workers are not the proletariat. But like, okay, so getting cursed at for 12 hours a day behind the counter at McDonald's or Starbucks, that's not proletarian.
Well, you're making a really important point is that there's really a lot of political education that really needs to be done. And an example was in Mao Zedong always talks about the United Front, and the United Front being all inclusive of those that are willing to, fight a certain battle. And after I got cancer and got my health back, I began to represent young people of color who had been murdered by the police. That's not in the book, or maybe it's in the very end of the book. But I had, 5 cases where 18-year-old Latino or Black people had been shot by the police, and I represented their family in civil suits. Now, we were having a march in San Francisco demanding justice for a Latino brother, Alejandro Nieto, who had been shot by the cops while he was eating a taco in the park. And these young kids, I saw them pull down these black ski masks and they went to start breaking windows at these little shops, these little bodegas. And I went over and got the security, the march security, and I said, we got to go stop these kids because those little store owners, they support us. They're not in favor of the system. They're just trying to scratch a living out of the system by running a small petty bourgeois shop. And that's education that we've got to understand how broad our movement can be when we're fighting, monopoly capitalism. And that means the Elon Musks, whose picture just came by. That means, folks that are at the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah. Yeah, Elon Musk is currently busy ruining Twitter. But I'm looking at the Menominee um, action that you took part in. There was an occupation, sort of like Wounded Knee, on this indigenous people's reservation in Wisconsin, the Menominee Reservation, right? And
Yep.
and you actually organized a lot of the Milwaukee worker people to go and support the occupation. And a couple black guys showed up in the indigenous at like one of the indigenous kids was like, where the fuck did these N-words come from and why are they on our reservation? That kind of shows like the importance of building unity through struggle, because like if the black dudes are just like packed up in one home being like, wow, the Indians are just as racist as white people, like there really wouldn't have been like any unity. But like through struggle and through political education, like, hey, like they treated us exactly like they treated y'all. Like they put y'all on reservations, they put us on plantations. Like it's like you
Yep.
said, it's really important to not just like I've been called racial slurs in person before. Like, okay, it's not akin to being on a plantation, being forced to work from sundown to sun up. And here's some asshole with a whip coming to beat the shit out of you because it makes his rock hard. So um yeah, it's not nice being called, like I get called racial slurs on the internet all the time. Like I ignore that stuff because it's nothing compared to what my ancestors went through. Like nothing compared to what my ancestors, even my grandmother. Like this lady had to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to start doing the chores on the farm, and then go pick cotton. And I don't know if you know anything about like picking cotton, but like cotton balls are sharp. Like she showed me scars on her hands that she has, like because it makes your hands bleed. And you
Yeah.
go like you reach down, you got to pick the cotton, pick the fluffy stuff off the bowl. That stuff is gonna cut you. Then you throw it in a sack, and it's
Right.
just stoop labor all day. I've never had to experience that, but at the same time, it's important to educate people and struggle against reactionary sentiment so that we can have a united and strong workers movement. And yeah, we're going to come across racism. We're going to be called bad words. We're going to be called mean names. But we're communists. We're revolutionaries, right? Like a guy literally called you a Jew communist and put a 38 in your stomach. But you didn't like, oh wow, I can't organize anymore. These people are hopelessly racist. Like you literally got the dude drunk and you talked it out with him. So that's a lesson I think we can learn. Now, I'm not saying that we should allow like open Nazis into our movement to be like, hey man, what's up? You're a worker too. Like if somebody is actually getting ready to harm a black person, like no, fuck that. But like we have to ask, as Mao would say, who are our enemies and who are our friends? And
Yep.
who can
That's
we
right.
who can we turn into a friend and who is an unreconstructed enemy?
Who's a class enemy and who's not?
Precisely. Um, so something else I wanted to say. So you had pancreatic cancer. Oh wait, it's something that you did it go completely away? Did they kill the cancer or
No, well, that they people might want to take a look at my website, www.jonathanmelrod.com, because I wrote about 85 pages on my battle against cancer, but we didn't have room to put it into the book.
oops.
But
I'm sorry,
I
I'm a
took on cancer the night they told me that we didn't get the cancer and that you only got 6 months to a year to live. I was awake all night and I started thinking to myself, why can't I beat cancer the same way that we've organized these very dangerous, very insurmountable political struggles? I mean, isn't everything something that you can put up a fight against and battle? And I decided I wasn't going to die. And the next morning, I told them that I had fired the doctors and that I was going to beat this disease. And I went on and I started looking for alternative treatments, Chinese medicine, alternative medicine. I also use chemotherapy and radiation. But mostly, developed a mindset that I'm not going to let this disease kill me. And I was able to, after 10 years, completely beat it, which was statistically impossible. But here I am. And now I work with a lot of people who come to me to counsel them on how can I, the sick person, put up a fight. So I spend a lot of time counseling people on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you basically like you've been an organizer and you've been a counselor for your entire life. Like you've always been adamant about like whether it be working in a factory or whether it be battling fighting against cancer. Um you're always good at like bringing people together. This is something I noticed in your book, and this is something that I noticed from our almost hour long discussion. Like you're really good at like bringing people together. Like, hey, this is the problem that we're going through. What the fuck can we do about it? Because I'm not gonna let anybody fucking kill me or make a punk out of me, whether it be a boss, whether it be cancer. So that's something that I really admire. That's fighting, struggling spirit, and I think that's like I mean, that's your background. Like your family, like this is your one of your ancestors who literally grew up in the Ukraine fighting against the Black Hundreds and pogromists. So it's in your
That's
blood.
right.
It's in your blood. Struggle is in your blood.
You know, when I first showed my youngest son that picture you were just focused on, he was real little and he came up to me and he said, "Dad, are we related to Osama bin Laden?" And
I,
I mean, he looked at that picture in his little childhood mind. It looked too close for comfort to him. But yeah, I mean, that was the background, was facing pogroms and facing that kind of, repression and massacres that used to go on, in the Ukraine, for Jewish people before we came to this country. And
how could I tell?
look,
Why could I tell this picture was taken in 1968? It's the jacket.
it's the jacket for sure. It's the tie and the jacket. The tie's coming back a little bit, but not the jacket.
Yeah, I have ties.
Paisley,
I have ties like that. I have ties
but
like that.
Paisley, but blue Paisley jacket from my graduation from high school. That ain't coming back.
I don't agree with Paisley. Paisley don't agree with me. Paisley went out in the 80s. But so you you're a lawyer, and you also work a lot with the Filipino movement. So it's kind of like you've come full circle. You got your start with the with SDS, and you ended up siding with what would become, I think it was RYM1. No,
Rim one, yeah.
Rim
Rim
One,
two.
Rim
Rim
Two.
two, yeah.
Yeah, I think was Rim One the Weatherman. I don't know. There were so many
Yes,
factions.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a video on them once. They were wacky.
Yeah.
You probably knew some of them. Wait
You
a
have a
minute.
lot of experience.
You did know some of them. Y'all actually threw some of them off a stage.
Yeah, we had, Students for Democratic Society was the organization, anti-imperialist organization of students at that time. And we had organized the first meeting in 1969 for new students. And there were over 500 students who had come to that meeting to learn about how to be part of the anti-imperialist fight.
Mm-hmm.
And we had planned to basically organize them around three goals: getting rid of ROTC, reserve officer training, getting it off campus because we were being forced to take mandatory classes. We wanted the Army Math Research Center, which was doing research on how many people you could kill in a jungle if you bombed it with with a certain bomb. And they didn't say people, they said how many ants can you kill? And
Jesus Christ.
The Land Tenure Center, which did the research that led to the killing of Che Guevara in Bolivia. So we wanted those three institutions thrown off of campus. Unfortunately, the weather people came and they tried to take over the meeting, about 12 of them. And they said, "Hey, anybody here who's a true communist, let's march out on the streets right now and start smashing buildings and fighting cops." Well, that's just not the way you organize, and that's not the way you get anything accomplished. Certainly wasn't going to be the way you ended the Vietnam War. So we had set up the room so we knew they were coming, and we had speakers, microphones in the back of the room. So we cut the mics in the front of the room. They couldn't talk, and we conducted the meeting from the back of the room. So you had to be organizing and thinking ahead all the time, particularly, when this sectarianism was threatening the unity of the organizational work that we were doing.
Yeah, and Fred Hampton didn't like the Weathermen either. He called them anarchistic, opportunistic, adventuristic, and customistic after their stupid little days of rage action. And like people are like, because Fred Hampton was actually a supporter of Rem 2. I think he appeared. I think Rem 2 during the days of rage, they did a solidarity action with striking workers at Caterpillar at a factory outside of Chicago. And Fred Hampton wanted this. He didn't go to the Days of Rage action because he thought it was stupid. Like, why are you going to go trash Lakeshore Drive in the Golden Coast? Like, all that's going to happen is a bunch of y'all are going to get arrested, and the black community is going to suffer because they're going to think that we did it. So that's exactly what happened. Like
Yeah, yeah.
all of these rich white kids. Well, I think there was one Japanese dude there, Shinya Ono. But all these rich white kids came to town and tore up downtown. I think a junior prosecutor ran into a wall head first and paralyzed himself. But
Oh, I think that's right. Yeah.
yeah, but it was a stupid, silly, pointless action. Like it did not stop the Vietnam War. Like everything that the Weather Underground did, it really didn't do anything. I think the Vietnamese even told them, like, why are you guys blowing up bathrooms? Why don't you organize a mass workers movement? Of course, their line was that I also think they tried to blow up the Chicago L. Yeah, and this let's just kill working class people on the way home from work. That'll get us some support. But like the Vietnamese told them to stop. Like, why don't you organize the working class and others together and demand that your country stop the war? And that's actually what helped stop the war. Well, that plus the fact that it was an unwinnable war, plus the fact that it was an expensive war, plus the fact that like even people in flyover countries started opposing the war once their kids started coming home in boxes. That's what stopped the war. Blowing up toilets
And,
didn't.
and and let me just add that I think the greatest factor to ending the war was the resistance of GIs, because when I started meeting Vietnam vets and I asked them about what they had done in Nam, they said we went 100 yards out, sat down, smoked pot, and then came back at the end of the day. We weren't engaging in any fighting. So they had really a mutiny on their hands.
Yeah.
There were 225 underground newspapers on army bases or in actual service, servicemen, service women putting out. So really the resistance of those soldiers were what basically ended the war, because General Westmoreland said that he couldn't rally enough soldiers to win that war.
Yeah. Yeah, like
But
my yeah, I
I'd
mentioned
like
my
to, no, I want to just say one thing when you were mentioning Fred Hampton, is that he's such an important figure. I mean, he only lived to 21 years old, but it was Fred Hampton. People think it was Jesse Jackson who came up with the Rainbow Coalition. In fact, it was Chairman Fred Hampton, and he had united the Young Lords. It was a Puerto Rican group. He had united the Brown Berets, which was a Chicano organization. He had united the Young Patriots, which was a white Appalachians who lived in Chicago, and then he had allied with the students and Students for Democratic Society. And when you listen to Chairman Fred speak, he challenged us. I heard him twice speaking at the campus. And his message had such a deep impact on all of us.
I love this picture.
It's a great picture.
Yeah, a little Puerto Rican kid, little Puerto Rican or white kid, and a little black kid sitting down eating. I love that picture.
And that's the essence of what was happening, and that's why when J. Edgar Hoover went after him and decided they were going to kill Fred Hampton, they did it because, as they had said in their own internal memos, we can't allow the Black Messiah to develop.
Yeah.
Because if there's a Black Messiah, then we face real revolutionary problems.
Yeah.
And, they got rid of Chairman Fred.
Yeah. They also they uh, they drove Stokely Carmichael because Stokely Carmichael was actually appointed the prime minister of the Black Panther Party by I believe Chairman Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. So COINTELPRO worked to discredit him, and it was actually the Panthers that helped run him out of the country because they said they were going to kill him because they heard that he had been going around saying bad things after they had made him prime minister, and like they did that a lot. That's what got Bunchy Carter killed. Bunchy
Yep.
Carter and John Huggins, and that's
Yep.
what helped trigger the split. Well, I think both Huey and Eldridge Cleaver's egos helped a lot because internal contradictions always like they make external contradictions like the FBI operative. So
That's right.
yeah, they knew that Huey and Eldridge were beefing, so they took advantage of that. So they ended up basically, we call it canceling nowadays. They basically ended up canceling each other on live television, and then they like it. The Panthers went to war with themselves. Like they were not really all that effective after '72 because like I think one guy, Sam Napier in New York,
Yep.
tied up and they threw gasoline on him and set the man on fire. And everybody loved Sam. Like he was the guy that helped put the paper together. All the kids loved him. Everybody loved him. So horrible shit like that started happening. People started leaving it. Like I'm not going to take part in this anymore. This isn't what I joined for. So yeah, COINTELPRO was like people underestimate the role, and it's still like they still use these methods, like the methods that they developed to fight the Black Panther Party. They're still using them. That's where SWAT teams came from. They developed SWAT teams to help try to destroy the Panthers in L.A. Like they were literally at war, a three-front war between the Panthers, the Karengites, the US organization, and the police in in Los Angeles.
Yeah. I mean, I had the real privilege to become friends with Big Man Howard, who was one of the original six founders of the party, Panther Party. He lived just a couple blocks away from me, really,
Oh yeah.
and he became active in the anti-police brutality work, and we worked together as he was in his elder years, and there was a lot to learn from him. But one of the things he used to tell me about was the destruction that the FBI wrought, particularly when they elevated Eldridge, who really was not a proletarian leader, um, particularly by the time Eldridge had gone to Algeria. But that's a long other story that's not for now.
Yeah. Somebody has a question. Do you think Kennedy was assassinated because he was trying to dismantle the CIA? I I don't know. I personally think the mob killed him because his dad, Joseph P. Kennedy, was tied into a lot of those mob dudes from his time in the '20s, helping to bootleg and do all these other horrible things. Well, not
But
horrible.
you know what? I just want to say, my youngest son, who's very political and really reads everything that he puts his hands on, he believes that the CIA did orchestrate that killing because Kennedy had come down on them after the Bay of Pigs, which was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows?
Yeah.
Um, could have
Yeah.
been the mafia, could have been the CIA. Maybe they're just the same thing anyway.
Yeah, there's actually a book. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with Douglas Valentine's work. Like he actually makes that. If you read Strength of the Wolf, and he also wrote a book about the CIA and Operation Phoenix. Like he argues like exactly that point. Like the ties between organized crime and the American intelligence apparatus are pretty myriad. They bump into each other quite a bit. Um, Somebody asks, who is Comrade Jon Melrod? This is Comrade Jon Melrod. Where were you for the past hour?
You have to catch it on the rebound.
Yeah, I'll catch you when I upload it to YouTube. This is his book. I highly recommend you get it. As a matter of fact, since you're late, now you're mandated to get it and read it and organize a union, which you should want
And
to do anyways.
when you go to get it on pmpress.org, make sure you put in the discount code in capital letters GIFT, and you'll get a 50% discount for the holidays.
Hmm.
And I hope you do read it because, you know, I get so much correspondence from young people all over the country, asking me for advice, asking me on questions on how to organize and, how to deal with this issue or that issue, or how to deal with the union when it's a business union. So there's a lot of lessons in the book, but it's really written as an experience, anecdotes from my life. It's not a heavy political diatribe. It's a story of how we fought in those days to try and bring about a revolution. You know, if I could go back to one thing that just really makes me go insane is when you hear these people talking about critical race theory and how critical race theory is going to divide people and it's going to distort our white kids' brains because they'll feel guilty when they hear about slavery. I always want to point out to people that in 1969 in Madison, there was a black student strike. And the black students were demanding the admission of more black students, ethnic studies, and an African American social center building. And SDS that I was in came to the support of the black students. Well, at one point during that strike, we led a march to the Capitol in Madison of 10,000 students. Almost all of them were white, and they were marching for the issues that the black students had raised as demands in that strike. So it's crazy to think that white people cannot learn if they're educated as to what the commonalities in the struggle really are.
Hmm. Yeah. Nate asks, can unions sometimes function as controlled opposition by the corporations?
Answer to that is yes. Unfortunately, the answer is yes. And that's why we've got a lot of reform movements going on in the unions. For instance, in the UAW, I'm part of UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy. And we played a big role in organizing the last strike. And Sean Fain, who is the new president of the UAW, is a member of that reform caucus. And, he scheduled the next contract to expire on May Day, calling on all unions to set their contract expirations on May Day so that the working class can flex its muscles. So, yes, corporations do control and manipulate, unfortunately, too many unions, but it's our job to take that power away and give it back to the rank and file.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that the Starbucks Workers United has a very, very big role to play. Like any younger union organizer needs to be trying to get with them. It needs to be like trying to emulate them in their own way, not exactly copy them because every industry is different. But like, there's a lot we can learn from both Amazon Workers United and from Starbucks Workers United. Like those are the two grassroots unions that are setting the standard for union activity. And then the old school unions, we should be paying attention to the UAW and the Teamsters, along with the ILWU, because like those are the three standards, and they're developing some really really cool stuff. The longshoremen, in particular, are at the forefront of labor anti-imperialism.
Yeah, it was the longshoremen that used to block arms shipments to South Africa in support of the anti-apartheid fight. They've always been very political, which is what unions can be, if they're led properly and if the rank and file holds a position where they can determine and influence the direction of the union.
Weren't the Teamsters controlled by the mob? Yes, they weren't controlled by the mob, but Jimmy Hoffa was was definitely in bed with the mob. It was the mob that killed him because he was lending money, if I recall correctly. He was lending money from the Teamsters pension fund to fund construction of casinos in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And then when he asked for them to start repaying on the money, they just shot him in the head and probably burned him up in a garbage incinerator. That's why you
And
don't.
then
Yeah, that's why you don't make deals with the fucking mob.
No, they're not a good ally
No, they're not. They'll use you up and then they'll kill you. Just like American imperialism.
for sure.
Yeah, but like if you like talk to guys who were actually around in when Hoffa was big, like they loved the guy because I mean he delivered. He just tried to deliver the wrong way. Like you can't make deals with U.S. imperialism and with the fucking mob because the mob doesn't give a shit about workers. The mob gives a shit about the mob. Frank Sheeran
Yeah, for
wasn't
sure.
Frank Sheeran wasn't the one who actually killed him, right? Like they don't know who killed him. He took Sheeran took credit for it, but that was because he was on his deathbed. I think that dude took credit for everything. He knew he was gonna die. What are they gonna do? What are they gonna do? Like come and pin all these murders on him? Like the dude was half dead. So yeah, I watched that movie, The Irishman. It's a very good film, but like in terms of like an historical document, mm-mm. But I got to start getting ready for work pretty soon. So Comrade Melrod, do you have anything that you want to leave our viewers with?
No, I just want to just say, yeah, a couple quick things. First of all, I really appreciate your level of knowledge on, Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. I think it's really inspirational, and I've been looking for more people who are doing just what you're doing. And I really want to thank your viewers and listeners. I think it's a great forum to be able to ask questions and answer them as we're talking. It's really, I find it really valuable and inspirational to hear from people. And lastly, I just hope people do buy the book. As I said, it's on sale for 50% off. You put in the code GIFT, GIFT in capital letters. And I promise you'll enjoy it, because not just because I wrote it by any means, because I've never been a writer before this. This is my first book, but just because of the reaction I get from Starbucks workers, Amazon workers, workers down south who are beginning to organize in electric bus plants, in new unions in auto plants. So, pick up a copy of Fighting Times. And I urge you all to get to be part of the struggle, because we're facing an existential crisis.
Yeah,
This earth will not survive if we don't take control over the development, or dismantle, rather, the levers of capitalism.
exactly. Off the internet into the streets.
There you go.
Be like Comrade Melrod. Just I wouldn't emulate his fashion choices from these times. All right. All power to